guys. Welcome for those that are joining and for those that are listening back. I'm going to change the speaker view here. Okay. All right. So today we have 3 chapters to go over. I feel like there's a lot. I feel like I say that every time. So we'll just do our best to get through everything that we can. We're going to do some, just like talking about things that are concepts that she taught, and then also some of those exercises. I feel like it's great to do those together. It's such a great way to use this time. So let's just start out with like in the chat. How are you guys feeling? How are you like maybe feeling in your body? If you know the words, the ventral or, calm or however, sympathetic, dorsal, or if you just feel activated and how are you feeling with labeling, that kind of stuff? Are people still confused at all about like what the different states are? And if you are, that's okay. There's a lot of repetition in the book built into it. Yeah, so sympathetic and activated, ventral-ish. Yeah, so that's such a good point, you guys. A lot of times we can have mixed states where she keeps it pretty, she doesn't go into all the details of this is this mixed state. And but she does say, as we will talk today, about like we could imagine these states as colors, and there might be some blending of colors sometimes. So yeah, ventral state mostly, and take some amino acid to soothe myself. Okay, so yeah, I felt a little activated myself today. One of the things she talks about, I just wanted to tell you this story. She talks about like starting to notice those cues of when we're going into shutdown or activation. And this just happened to me on my way to take my son to school this morning. These dogs ran out in the street, like crossing 4 lanes of traffic, and I went into shutdown. I felt heavy and my body sunk, and I was like, ugh. Yeah, I was just waiting at the light. And so I was like watching it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, these dogs. And then they crossed the street fine. The people stopped for them and they just kept running down the sidewalk. And I drove past them and they looked like they were having the best time. And they were just like, just running free. And I started kind of laughing and I just thought how like cute they were. And so within those few moments, I totally went into dorsal and then I went totally into ventral and was like, oh, life is okay. So just being sensitive to those little cues. Have you guys been picking up on more of the cues now that you've been, learning this vocabulary and noticing things differently, maybe? Let's see. Wendy says, moving in and out of ventral. Had a time last week I went almost into stuck dorsal state. It was helpful understanding this and didn't panic. Yeah, that's the main thing about this work, right? Is we're not going to get to the point where we're so evolved we never have these survival states. They're here to protect us. Be like putting your hand on a hot stove. You want to know that it's dangerous. You want to move your hand. So it's more about just flowing between these states. So good. Lots of dorsal this week too. Yeah. Yeah. And another thing she talks about a lot is just like not judging it. It's not like a moral decision or a failure or we're weak or and Wendy says, yeah, good to know I'm not alone. Exactly. That's the thing. The more we normalize that, like we could go into and out of these states several times during a day. It's normal. You're not alone. This means it is working, right? Yeah, so good. So the first chapter is about neuroception. She had introduced it before, but basically it's, the feelings from inside the body. It could be the body, the environment, or like the bigger environment, the world. So this is what she talks about as your intuition in a way, like the way that you pick up on information that's not cognitive. So our neuroception doesn't always mean that what our body is telling us is true, right? Because a lot of us are going into these survival states because we think everything's dangerous. So not intuition in the sense of like, oh, I'm really scared to go to this meeting, and so that means I shouldn't go, right? It's more just like knowing what is going on with your body and bringing it back to as much safety as you can, because chances are the meeting is not a survival threat or whatever. um, so one thing I wanted to go over with you guys is have you think for a second about what shaped your neuroception. So like thinking of your family of origin and what kinds of things like they would say it was safe to do. So she gives some examples of like, in my family, it was safe to say what I was feeling. Or in my family, people pretended like nothing was happening and it was safer to not have feelings. So I talk with this to my clients all the time about like why, what we kind of messages we learned as kids that shaped why we go into these states. And so for most of us, there are some times that we learned either like we need to be really worried about what other people are thinking, so show up small. And that's what that was. My family's was like, what would the neighbors think? What would the neighbors think? Because we were in like a little town of lots of people who were at the same religion, going to the same church every week. And so it's like, what are all the neighbors thinking about us? Do you guys have any of those that come to mind? In my family, blank. In my family, we're not allowed to be angry, or we had to, work when unless we were really, really sick, we had to just push through, things like that. So just think of those things for yourself. Feel free to share them if you like. It gives us that, frame of reference, that understanding, that compassion. That's the biggest thing with this. Okay, yeah, you guys are putting some good stuff here. Let's see. If excuse me, if you're not worrying, you don't care, right? It's so good to know that you had that belief growing up. If you're not worrying, you don't care, because subconsciously then we can be, we won't let ourselves into that safe state because we're like, well, that means I don't care, right? So I have to always be worrying to show that I care. So you just want to find all these like thought errors or things that aren't working for you anymore. Not safe to be angry. That's so common, especially for those of us raised as women, right? Is like, you shouldn't do that. It's not safe. Sad feelings weren't allowed, not acceptable to be upset. Pull up your bootstraps no matter what. Whatever rupture happened didn't get acknowledged. I think it taught me to not trust the cues from my body. Right. Or quiet warriors like don't care. Right. Just like, oh, it doesn't matter. It's fine. I don't care. So yeah, again, we're just bringing this understanding and this like compassion to our nervous system. And now when we go into these states, it's not like this big mystery of like, why does this keep happening? Oh yeah, because I was literally taught this for like the first few decades of my life. We need to look like we have it all together all the time. Totally. Right. And then that shows up and how we present ourselves in the world and what we will do and we won't do, and we limit ourselves so much because we're like, oh, I don't have it all together, I won't put myself out there or whatever. Yeah, you guys got it. You guys know you got a lot of those, and me too. Okay, so there's a little exercise that we can do. I want you to just think of, you can close your eyes if you want, and just think of like what that surveillance system in your body might look like. So she said, you might imagine it as, where does she say, like a lighthouse with a beacon that's revolving around, like shining that light all around, or a guard in a watchtower, or a gentle watchdog who's always ready to respond, or a ball of light that changes color. So just imagine for you, and it could be different day to day, but like today, can you imagine that inner surveillance system, what that's like looking like? And again, we're just doing this to be curious. From before, Wendy's saying, I resonate with what would the neighbors think? We might lead people astray. Yeah, so much responsibility. And so many of the people that I work with who have chronic pain, they've really shown a connection between this sense of duty and really being hard on ourselves and all these personality traits and chronic pain. So I think it all has to do with not feeling safe and our nervous system. All right. So did you guys have a sense of where that is in your body, that guarding, that internal surveillance system? If you can find that, you could put your hand on it. And maybe for me, I was thinking about it, and it's kind of like not just one place, it's kind of my chest and my stomach. But if you could find that surveillance system, and then what we want to do is bring perception to it. So she says, like, when we bring perception to neuroception, then, I don't remember how she said it, but basically that's what we do to rewire and unravel these old pathways and to teach the nervous system now that we're calm and safe. So you might think of that perception up in your head or through your eyes. So you could put your other hand there and you could think of that place. So between where your neuroception, where you're like picking up these clues from the environment and from your body, and then where you're bringing in that perception, that rational thinking brain, the present moment. You can have your two hands there and feeling the pathway between. So she says, I marked it because, maybe this will happen for you. She says, my neuroception to perception pathway is marked by curves and loops in its route from the center of my chest to my forehead. So just take a moment and imagine what happens for you when you allow yourself to think of that pathway, how it might look. And you can always start to bring in a little of that perception when your body's feeling, dysregulated. And you can imagine moving, through that pathway. She says we have some general things that our body just responds to in certain ways. With high frequencies, we want to look towards the sound and go help. With low frequencies, we want to get away. There were some examples in the pain science world where they said people are more likely to perceive someone as unfriendly if they're holding an iced coffee versus if they're holding a warm coffee. So our our neuroception, how we're feeling in our body, can change the way we perceive the world. So how are you guys feeling about neuroception, understanding this neuroception is happening within our body, the cues from the environment, and then the cues from the larger environment, like the world, all play into our neuroception? All right, so we're going to go to another exercise. I love how she just walks you through describing with lots of vocabulary these different states. And with the neuroception, again, she's talking a lot about the transition between the states. So not just identifying what the states are, but there's these like connections between them and this pathway and this way for you to get back to safety, even if you're in, fully in dorsal. So we can start to notice the cues in our body. So let's start with sorry, I'm just like reading it at the same time. I've highlighted so much that it's like so much highlighted that it's hard to see what the important parts are. But for this one, we start with just a body scan, just seeing where you're at. We did this a little bit at the beginning. And oh yeah, and Michelle says it was fascinating that each state develops at different times. Yeah. So even in our like prenatal development, the ventral or the safe one is like the last one to be online. It's like, the primitive brain, and she talks about it, the reptilian part and the mammalian part. So thinking of it that way is like, these are just these biological processes. And you might notice how they feel in your body. So if you're in ventral, so let's go to imagining that safe place. And we'll talk a little bit later if you're not really able to access the safe place. That can be really normal. So don't judge yourself. If you're like, I don't really feel safe anywhere, that can happen. But if you are able to tune into some ease or safety, how would you start to feel that? Maybe your heart, becomes a slower rhythm if you were activated, or kind of more a speedy rhythm if you were shut down. You could notice maybe your breath changes when you're feeling safe. The warmth in your body might change. So how does it feel to you when you have that ventral in your body and you're feeling it? And then how does it feel if you're thinking of if you start to look around for cues of danger? So we're feeling safe, and then we're going to start to look around your immediate environment for cues of danger and bring to your awareness the space that you're in. Is there anything distressing? When you move your awareness out to the larger environment, like the world, are there things that are distressing that come up to you? And just notice how that feels in your body when you think about other issues, things that might be dangerous. And then we're going to anchor back to those cues of safety. So again, feel back in your body what feels safe to you, even in this environment. You could look around your room again and notice, maybe you notice you're in a safe place with walls and heat and light, and you start to notice the safety in the immediate environment, or maybe what brings you joy. And then as you think of your awareness in the larger environment, can you bring a little of that safety in as well? So what feels nourishing? What signs might you have of connection with others? Maybe it's their facial expressions or tones of voice or posture and movements. How can you look at those cues of safety when you're interacting with others or in the larger environment? So let's go to the chat. There's some good stuff here. Yeah, I realized only a few months ago, I often don't feel safe outside of my home. Yeah, absolutely. There's people that I've coached about that. And, we've related it back to where they grew up. And they were literally told like to, really be worried if they were out on the streets alone, things like that. And then, yeah, Deb, that's a good question. Has it always been like that or changed since COVID? Yeah, that's such a good question always to kind of ask yourself, is like, when did this start? Has it always been like this, or is it just more recently? And then what could be going on with that? And then, Sarah, I notice I don't feel totally safe in the presence of other humans, like when I'm walking around. Yeah, so good to know. I was noticing, I think I told you guys once, I was in a steam room and like I just was trying to close my eyes, and just having other people in there, I just noticed I couldn't quite get to that place of calm that I could when no one else was in there. Yeah. And then Michelle says, I feel this way often. I'm intentional about my connections and look for anchors. Yes. And what she talks about here is that our nervous systems are primed to behave a certain way, and they can always change. So it's good for understanding to know our history and why we're, like, for compassion to know why we think this way, but also we can have that hope and that understanding that, especially as we work with our nervous system and do it gently and like gradually, that it can reshape and we can start to be more dominant in the safety state than in the other states. Yeah. Okay. So people, yeah, doing a little like kind of coaching about the different states in the coaching, or sorry, in the COVID thing. Yeah. So sometimes, and here's the thing, like you might have kind of worked through some of these issues and then they come up in a new scenario. So just know, like for me, I always use the example of dancing. Like I feel like I've gotten over a lot of my self-criticisms and being harsh on myself, but once I started dancing, then it's like all those old judgments and things have been coming back up. So just be so patient with yourself. Maybe you start a new job, or maybe something else changes. And you're like, oh my gosh, I thought I'd gotten over this. Why am I, it's like, this can come back up, and it's just, again, that nervous system trying to protect you. And then, yeah, someone's gently pushing to build resilience. Yeah, and she does talk about resilience, which is that capacity to come back. It doesn't have to be that we're always regulated. It's just that we notice that we're dysregulated and come back. That's resilience. And she talks earlier about stretching, not stressing, right? So we want to like get to the point that we're stretching ourselves and it feels just a little stretchy and good. But when we get to the point that we're really stressing to the point that we're shutting down, obviously we just always are keeping an eye on that. And it's different for every person. And each day it's this art, right? And then Deb, hilariously, since I moved back to NYC, driving has helped me build strength in my nervous system. Yeah. I don't know why sometimes it cuts off these. Okay. Yeah. Wow, that's pretty crazy. Just thinking about driving New York City is activating to me. Yes. Right. So good to know that. Like, let's take a moment and just think of like something that's activating to you that other people might not find activating. Just be like curious about it. My daughter cannot stand the sound of puffy jackets. She just hates that sound and she just cringes. And for everyone else, it's like, might even feel safe and snuggly and cozy. Um, and then think of something that a lot of people would not find safe that you do, right? Like some people might love being in front of people, or they might love other things that you might love something that for someone else would be really activating. Yeah. So when we start to look for just those cues and like starting to feel when the body is either starting to get activated or starting to go into more of the collapse and shut down, or when you're in those states starting to go towards more of the safety, that could those little cues can help us so that we're not getting so dysregulated that it's harder to come back. All right, so cues of safety. Sorry, I've marked so much. I'm trying to speed through it a little bit more. Okay, so basically, as we've said, curiosity, compassion, that is the solution, right, for this. Because we're not going to not have these nervous system responses, but when we can work with them, then we can move in and out of these states so much easier. Let's talk about, she talks about our home away from home. So for some people, they'd be like, my home is fight or flight. But let's assume that your home is ventral, in that like safe place. And they even say, what is that fun quote? There's a great quote about like the eternal summer that's inside of you. I just love that, thinking of that. In the middle of winter, I at last discovered that there was in me an invincible summer. So you could think of that as that like ventral that you're grounding into, that you're noticing is there. Like I think of like the sun rises every day, even if it's cloudy outside, the sun is still there, right? There's this safety that's inside. And the capacity for moving out of protection and returning to connection is built into our biology. So this is something that everyone here can do. Yes. And self-compassion has been hard for you lately and working on it. Yeah, absolutely. I honestly feel like that's the hardest part. I'm really good at identifying it. And then it's a little harder to be self-compassionate about it. And safety is an inside job. Exactly. So when we're talking about that home away from home, I had a hard time with this because I feel like I kind of go equally into like fight or flight and equally into dorsal. So I don't know how you guys feel about that. I feel like it might even be like dorsal, like shut down, but with enough activation that I see all the things I should be doing, but then I feel bad that I'm not doing them. But I want you to just think of that ventral place again. We've practiced it earlier today. See if you can find that place of safety. Let me know in the chat too if anyone's having a hard time like tapping into that. But as you're like in that ventral place, imagining maybe a beach that you love to go to, or someplace that is calming, and feeling like that could be your home, your home that you're usually in. And your home away from home might be that anxiousness or that shutdown. So for you, what does your body tend to go to more, and how does that feel? What kinds of things move you into protection? So you could think of, maybe it's a loud voice, or maybe it's a lot of people, or maybe it's, environments I'm not familiar with, or too many emails or whatever. It moves us into protection, and just knowing what those, kind of cues along the pathway are that take us there, and then how we can get back. All right. She says she loves to use that word yet. So, like, I don't feel safe yet. I can't be curious about the story I'm telling myself yet. I love that one. So, have you guys ever felt that where you're just like so mad at someone that you don't even want to feel better? You're just like, I just want to be mad right now. I just want to, like, I don't, you can kind of like, your coach brain maybe knows this part of what's going on is also true, but you're just so in it. So I love that phrase of like, I can't be curious about the story I'm telling myself yet. Doesn't mean that I won't be able to, but I can't look at other people without judging their behaviors yet. So again, it's not a matter of like being perfect about it or like being always regulated. It's just being patient and realizing what's going on and starting to understand and support ourselves in it. Okay, so let's look at as you start to feel what happens when you go into the mobilization, how that feels. Like, what does that feel like for you when you get into the fight or flight? For me, it's like my heart rate increases and like a fluttery feeling in my chest. And then see what you feel like when you start to feel that dorsal, that collapse, the maybe shame, I'm not good enough. And someone said, find it an amazing experience to choose, alert and relaxed. Yeah. Okay. I love that. Because she does say, like, you could notice that you're in a state and you could say something like, I'm going to bring in just enough ventral energy, enough of that safe energy to help me stay, focused and clear-minded or relaxed. So again, we don't have to like get to a place of laying on the beach, perfect Zen, but we could invite in a little bit of that ventral energy. And sometimes fight or flight feels positive. I get really busy doing all sorts of chores, and then I realize I'm kind of in flight. Yeah, a lot of times we use that activation energy to get us motivated to do things. And so it's not necessarily all bad, but again, when we're stuck in that, or we're not bringing in some of that grounding and that ventral, then you're feeling that difference probably, right, Sarah? Um, So yeah, just bringing in some of that safety. Let's try it in another way. So another exercise that she has is with imagining circles and the different states. The first one is the dorsal, the shutdown is the inner circle. Okay. And so that's again the most primitive one. Do you remember when we talked about the different animals that it would represent? That's like the turtle shutting down in its shell, hiding. And then outside of that circle, surrounding it, is the sympathetic, the activation, which is the fight or flight, that energy, that shark attacking. And then outside of that circle, the furthest circle out, is the ventral. And so that's the safe. And it's like that ventral is like holding and enveloping the other two states. So you could think of it that way. And I want you to think, maybe you want to close your eyes for this. Hopefully those circles made sense. I didn't do a visual of it, but if you have the book, there is a visual, but they're just 3 circles. And I want you to imagine the colors of those circles. So imagine what you would think of for the color of the ventral state, that regulated, safe, feeling open, connected. What color would that look like to you? You can imagine that in the outer circle. And then starting to move into some of that sympathetic activation, that, more of that frenetic energy and more of that fight or flight, and something's a little wrong and I've got to fix it. What color of circle would you imagine for that, for the sympathetic middle circle? Imagining that color and maybe how the colors can mix together as you go from feeling safe to feeling more activated. And then imagine that middle circle, the dorsal, and what color that would be to you and how that feels, the tightness, maybe slumping over, curling in, noticing that color that you would imagine it to be, and then noticing that you could mix in those colors. If you were going from that inner circle dorsal to the sympathetic, you might see those colors mix as you progress outward towards the outer circle and back to that ventral. If you guys want to put in the chat how that went for you, I'm curious about the colors, but I also wanted to tell you a cute little story one of my clients told me, because she's reading this book too, and she said she decided to name her ventral Mama, like that safe, secure state. She named it Mama, and her activated was like Speedy, and her shutdown was Sleepy. So I love that. So you can think of it in different ways, in colors, in cute words, and personalities. But then again, it's all different ways of being more compassionate, being more neutral, giving the brain something different to think about than the old story. All right. How'd that go for you guys with the colors? Some people don't love imagining colors. So if that wasn't your thing, there are so many other exercises here. So it's kind of nice. Don't worry about if one doesn't particularly resonate with you. There's other ways of looking at it. Okay, so good. So just find those cues, find those patterns. When we start to notice the cues, then we can look for patterns, and then we can start to get more resilient as we start to just, add that neutrality to it, notice those patterns, see certain ways that we're able to bring ourselves back. And instead of blaming ourselves or being critical or judging ourselves. I feel like I'm repeating myself so much, but literally I'm kind of going through, and she's like, okay, be curious, tell a different story. It's all that same kind of stuff of being more compassionate, right? All right. So let's try to imagine that let's do some what she was talking about with pathways. So you could imagine this pathway maybe as not lungs, rungs on a ladder. That maybe the lowest is that dorsal, and you can climb up the rungs to the sympathetic and then up to the ventral. She says you could imagine it like an actual path that you're walking, maybe it's like a mountain trail or a rope to hold on to, or an elevator or a stream of light. So this idea is just to help when you are feeling dysregulated or trapped, to give you some kind of idea of like this pathway out. So do any of those resonate with you guys, or did you think of something else that could be this pathway from that hierarchy from the dorsal to the sympathetic and then into ventral? She also talks about maybe you have little resting places along the path, or stopping points like an elevator, or railings or handholds or shades of color. So do you see how there's a lot of variety, and you can really make this yours? And just because you think of one thing one day doesn't mean, maybe it's a lighthouse one day, and another time it's like a worker with a, clipboard that's writing down all these things. So just go with what is there. But for right now, as you imagine that path or that transition, like, how do you imagine it? And what would those little resting points or stopping points along the way be? As we see it more of a continuum, that's helpful more than just this black and white thinking of like, it's just completely dysregulated or it's completely ventral. because a lot of times it's very mixed. There might be a button you push on the elevator to go up, or a stream of light that helps you beam up, or a hand that reaches out to you. She even talks about sometimes reaching her own hand up to signify, coming out. Have you guys had any experience with that? Are there any of those things that resonate with you or that you've already done? Sarah says, I played with the colors, but probably more are usually just a word to describe. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If colors aren't your thing, don't even worry about it. Skip over that one. And I like the words too. I'm kind of a word nerd. I like the emotions and the words and the feeling of it. So any of these are just like little tools in our somatic tool belt. All right. Home away from home. Da, da, da. Okay. So the last chapter is anchoring in safety. That's where I love that. The invincible summer. So we have this place that our biology knows that we can go to, and it's possible for all of us. And it's essential for us actually too, right? She talks over and over about our health, our mental and physical health that's better when we're anchoring in ventral, or when we're, going into that calmer state. And a lot of people will say, like, I've got to like figure out all these things from my past and go through them and let them go. But I like how she describes it here, that it's more kind of present tense, current, that like when we feel more ventral, so more safe, then we'll, kind of we'll gravitate more towards that. When we feel more cues of danger than safety, then we'll go into one of those protective states. But it doesn't necessarily mean like you have to resolve all your childhood trauma before you start feeling safe. You're just looking for moment to moment. Am I feeling more safe, or am I feeling overall less safe? You know what I mean? So I think that was really helpful she says, if we have like a critical mass of ventral, then we can stay in that ventral state. Does that help to think of it as more of like a present tense kind of thing? We don't have to like fix all the things from the past in order to feel good now. All right. And then you guys know I love this kind of stuff, but we'll read the quote. When you're more in the ventral state, there's reduced incidence of heart disease, regulated blood pressure, healthy immune system, reduced inflammation, and good digestion. There's mental health benefits, including reduced stress, less depression and anxiety, increased self-compassion, and compassion with others. Okay, and then this is really good too. She talks about the many flavors of ventral. So sometimes I call it like the parasympathetic calm state and think of it as calm, but it could also be excited, passionate, joyful, aware, engaged, curious, alert, ready, focused. So see what words resonate with you, and you could imagine this along a continuum too. This time she has you do it like a line, so just like a horizontal line, and at one end is the dorsal, and in the middle is the sympathetic, and on the other end is the ventral. And so you might think of it along that line, that when you feel maybe like you're a little activated, but you're starting to go into the ventral, like how does that start to feel? She says you might feel like an ease, or a softening, or a relaxing, or arriving, or present. I think of it as like a breath of fresh air. And then when you're fully all the way over in the ventral, like fully immersed in ventral, maybe there's a time in your life you can think of that. And how does that feel when you're just like abundant, alive, feeling at one, passionate? So that's more when you're like, feeling really good. And then along that scale, you might go back towards that, what's it called? Activation, the sympathetic, how that starts to feel. And then as you go towards from the sympathetic to more of that shutdown. How does that feel? Maybe there's like this hopefulness and motivation, and then it starts to feel like, oh, it's too much. I can't do it all. I'm not good enough. And then when you're fully all the way over on the other end of the continuum, how does that feel? You might think of a time in your life where you felt really hopeless. Everything looks bleak. And then you can move yourself back over. Imagine that continuum going back the other way and starting to feel a little more of that like activation. There might be like just a thought of like, there's some hope, or I can do this, or I'm alive. That can start to move you into like that activated state and then into ventral. Because remember, we move through that activation in order to get to ventral. Okay. Excuse me. Okay, so glimmers. We talked a little bit about glimmers in an earlier one, but we have glimmers all around us all the time, but we don't always notice them. If we're in protective states, it's very hard to notice them. But we can train our brain to start to look for glimmers, even though we have that negativity bias. And I love this. Like I'm just going to read the quote exactly. Finding glimmers doesn't mean that we don't also experience suffering. Rather, it's an acknowledgement that our nervous system is capable of holding both moments of safety and moments of survival. So I think of this time for me that it was like pretty soon after my mom died, like within a week, and I was in a lot of grief, and it was new for me because I hadn't had anyone close to me die. And so I kept like feeling like I was doing grief wrong. And I remember this one moment, I was driving my daughter to school and this song came on and I started kind of like dancing to the music. And then I felt immediately really bad that I was like having some joy when I felt like I shouldn't have joy at all. So that really reminded me of like, you can have some moments of safety and moments of suffering at the same time. And to, invite in those moments of safety and glimmers when we can. It doesn't devalue, the suffering or the pain, or it doesn't mean that I don't care or that I loved her less. But again, sometimes because of some of our beliefs, like we talked about earlier, we might not think it is okay to feel safe. Like we don't want to feel good and happy when there's suffering in the world. So it's a practice. It's like a gratitude journal of starting to train your brain to look for those things that feel good, that feel safe. And it could even just be a millisecond or like 2 seconds, right? It's not going to be like, oh, my whole day I felt good, because your nervous system, it's building its capacity to feel better and better. So the more we notice them, the more of them we'll see. When you do you all know what I mean when I say glimmers? I guess I didn't really describe it, but it's that little feeling of like, oh, life is going to be okay. She says she feels it with a feeling of softening around her eyes, the beginning of a smile. You might notice a glimmer through your senses, a smell, a taste, a sight, a sound, a touch. So think about glimmers. You could keep a glimmer journal. Try to maybe see one per day or every morning to find a glimmer. And she says, look for those predictable glimmers. Like I said, just noticing things that you can do each day on purpose. And then she does say that sometimes finding glimmers can initially feel dangerous. There was a person she referenced that said it was like building a sandcastle on the edge of the surf that any moment could get washed away. So know that if that's your experience, sometimes we talk about all this like good feeling stuff, like, oh, that's just natural, you should feel like that. But if your nervous system is not used to that, and you've been told things like worrying is how you show you care or whatever that earlier thought was, we're just like building this capacity and being patient with it, but it doesn't have to like change all at once. That's very normal. Let's see, she says, My friend's love of nature and daily walks offered her a way to regularly notice a glimmer and make glimmers predictable and nourishing. But, some people might be like, oh, I used to love walking, but I can't walk anymore because of pain or whatever. So notice what for you is a predictable glimmer, and just, it's very much human nature to be like, here's all the things I can't do that I want to. So just notice if your brain goes there of like, well, I used to like sing and dance and now I can't do those things. And you know what I mean? Like, start to notice what you do have, what glimmers there are now. You might be like, well, I want to co-regulate with this one person, then they don't like me. No, what can you do now? Oh, you have a cat you can pet or whatever, right? So starting to notice those types of things. She even says what we wear. So we might have like a certain shirt or sweater or shoes that we wear that we feel more like confident in, or that we feel more comfy in or safe. We might have things that we smell that feel more safe and set the environment for that. There are places that we can go to in the world that we feel more safe. But again, you might be like, well, yeah, I love to go to the beach, but I won't be able to do that till next year. You don't have to wait till next year to start to feel safe. You can notice that there are those things you try to bring in more of your life, but you also, you know, the brain will want to be like, well, there's this one thing I want to do and I can't. So just notice your brain might want to do that. And then you're going to just redirect it back to what you can do and what is here and what is within your capacity. Maybe it's not getting up and dancing, but you're just like turning on a song and chair dancing or something. Okay. So notice what environments to you feel like your home, what kind of environments physically and personally, like maybe you have a place in your house that is a calming place or environment for you. She talks about that she collects rocks, and so sometimes she looks for certain rocks, and that can be safe and calming, or sometimes she'll actually take a rock with her if she wants some extra support that day. So think for yourself of what are those things that are calming for you. um, Maybe it's those comfy clothes or a blanket. Um, Someone gave me like this crystal, and so I just keep that on my desk. And so sometimes it's supposed to be like good for intuition, I think, this amethyst. So I mean, it doesn't have to be a crystal. I didn't believe in crystals for a long time, but someone gave this to me and it feels good when I hold it and I like it. So again, find what works for you, what feels safe for you. The last thing is the mnemonic of safe. So anytime we have like this instance that we're learning about with ourselves, we can look at all the different components of it. Like the story that we have behind it is for S. So she tells the story of like some of her aging concerns and health concerns. And so her story was kind of more of a helpless story, but then she incorporated the story of a tree that she loved as a kid and how the tree has grown and, sometimes has some like, gnarled, branches and things like that, but it's still like a tree that she anchors onto. Like she just loves those memories about it, and it's getting older just like she is, but it's like safety, right? So she retold the story to one of safety. And then you could, A is for action. So you could imagine yourself, like she imagined herself standing in front of the tree, sitting on the tree. She imagined the time she used to climb in the tree. So you could imagine yourself doing something with this action. And then feeling, like, what is the feeling that you're having? She remembers the joy of being a kid, the feelings of freedom when she was climbing. She doesn't climb anymore, but she can still feel freedom in her life. So she feels the combination of being free and rooted, and she feels content. And then the embodied sensation. So she's actually feeling it in her body, the body's excitement of climbing and feeling the energy on the hands and feet, and the excitement flowing easily in the body. Remembering her connection with the tree, she can feel the energy. So those are all just like little different ways of feeling into that landscape of safety, right? By telling a different story, by imagining an action and the feeling and sensation about it. And then lastly, she says to celebrate it. And again, sometimes we might not want to celebrate because we might have been told like not to be proud about things or not to be too vain or like wait for the other shoe to drop. So just, she said, if you feel uncomfortable with the celebrating, just to kind of like have that as an idea of something you could start to work on, but don't force yourself to celebrate. She's like, celebrating if it resonates for you, is how she said it. So if you are someone that has a harder time feeling like you can feel safe, a few of the statements she said, I'm here and I can take in the joy of being with others. If I need to run away from dangers, I have a friend who will go with me. So she noticed a time that she was disconnecting from a friend and feeling unsafe. And so she rewrote the story about how, if I am in this situation, I know what to do and I have this help, basically. Okay, and I keep saying last thing, but the last thing is like savoring it. So drawing it out, appreciating it, amplifying, savoring. So when we have those glimmers, attending to them, like noticing them, appreciating them, staying with them, amplifying them. And she says this only takes 20 to 30 seconds. So it's not like you have to do whole long 45-minute meditation to appreciate these things. You can just savor for 20 to 30 seconds several times a day. Brings you back to the present moment, brings you back to safety. And yeah, I think that's good. So there's a few more things we didn't quite get to, but we went through 3 chapters today, so that's so good. So I guess I'll end with, there's this Rumi poem, there's a candle in your heart ready to be kindled. So she says that's our ventral vagal. It's like this candle that when nourished and cherished, it will burn brighter and warmer, bringing us health, growth, and restoration. So what do you guys think? Any last comment, questions? We just have a few more minutes, but felt like I was rushing through all that. Now I'm like, breathe. Okay, Renee, so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I think Deb Dana has such a beautiful way of just like, this is so compassionate and gentle. And like every time I read this book, I'm just always like, I feel like I'm wrapped in a warm, cozy blanket and just like being rocked in a rocking chair or something. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like you would want to read it again and again, because it's good reminders to do these little practices.
Yes.
And what's like, if you're like in an emotional state, I mean, how do you tell like which, like if you're just activated, like something happened and then you're sort of parts of you from like your childhood are activated and feeling really hurt or whatever, and maybe you're crying or you're just like really, I mean, is that, I guess it's like if you feel really buzzy, then it's more sympathetic, or if you feel more like shut down, it's more dorsal, or sometimes the emotion stuff feels like intense, right? Even grief.
Yeah.
What state do you think that corresponds with?
Like specifically that, like,
Well, I just, I mean, I was just, as I was thinking, I was like, had something going on yesterday and I was like, oh, I didn't even think about what, emotionally, like which of these type of states I was in at the time, and so
maybe we
that,
could do a little quick demo of like your situation if you want to share, and just like how we rewrite the story and the
yeah,
action.
yeah. I mean, I think that's basically kind of what I was doing, but
Yeah.
sort of, I mean, I think I was sort of in sympathetic because it was like, I had the part of me that was like really sad and hurt. It was just basically, it was like a client who was thinking she wanted to quit. Sent an email, Mother's Day morning, it's like, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
And but then I had other parts of me that like kind of were like mobilizing and like, okay, well, here's what we have to do. So there's like a lot going on. I was more of
Yes.
a sympathetic, I think,
Yeah. I think
but I
you're
wanted to make space for the part that just needed to feel those like sad feelings before I went into any type of action.
Yeah.
response, which I did. But yeah, now there's like I'm thinking about it sort of with this spectrum or this ladder, however we would look at between all of the states and um yeah, it's like where was I exactly? I guess it's just sort of a practice that you sort of think about.
Yeah, and maybe like, I don't know, the mixed states, just thinking of it as more like I was shut down in this way because I was thinking like, she doesn't like me and I felt rejected or whatever.
Right,
And
yeah.
then I'm putting words in your mouth, I know, but like just to
Yeah,
kind of,
basically, yeah, I'm not good
okay,
enough.
yeah.
The old standby, that
Yeah,
we
I mean,
go
like
back to.
dorsal is dorsal. It's like, oh, something's wrong
Yeah,
with me. I'm not good enough. Da da da. Right? Like that's the just classic dorsal. And then there's also that activation of like, I should fix it. Like, how can I do better? How can I like, if I could just like, maybe I can send her more resources or maybe, right? And so both are like, both serve their purpose and just understanding like there's probably some of both. Does that resonate?
yeah, yeah. So you're sort
Yeah.
of maybe even just like moving between the two.
Yeah.
And it's just
I
it's
think
such a
so.
yeah, it's such a just a fluid thing, and just having
Yeah.
that awareness of it is helpful. Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
definitely notice I have a still have like judgment about the dorsal state, like,
Uh,
just like, from the, sort of patriarchy,
yeah.
productivity culture of like, oh, that's bad. That's when you're not doing anything and you need to be
Yep.
doing stuff. And
Yeah.
it's almost unsafe too, because we do need to do stuff to create income and, survival and all of that. So
Yeah.
I would like to be able to give myself a little more grace for dorsal, because I think it would be easier to more um just gracefully move through into other states if I wasn't like resisting dorsal so much,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's such good insight. And I think that is, like you said, like a common thing in our society to be like, fight or flight is actually kind of glorified,
Yeah.
this productivity, this like crazy, like workaholic, like, oh yeah, that's the good state to be in somehow. And then this dorsal one is like bad. And
Yeah.
so just, yeah, noticing those judgments we're giving it. For me, I just love like that inner child work for dorsal just helps me so much to think of a, you know, little Betsy that's really scared and shut down and, just working with her and helping her feel safe. But,
Yeah.
it could be any of these other, she has so many different like ways to think of it and landscapes and colors and tools here. But I think you hit the nail on the head. The not judging it is the biggest first piece. Then
Yeah.
you're allowed to, then you can change from there. But
Yeah.
when there's so much resistance to it, then it makes it really hard to change.
Hangs on. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for doing these. It's really good to, because you can read a book and then it's just like, oh, you forget everything. So when you come and meet and talk about it,
Yeah.
it helps
Oh
to
my gosh, yeah, it's been so helpful for me too. And if you're on that Facebook group and want to put any of your insights, there's part of me that's like, oh, I wish I had like given you guys a lot more chances to talk and stuff. So if want to just like discuss things more, we have that Facebook group as well.
Okay,
And
sure. Yeah.
thanks for
Yeah.
your like popping on and for the chat and stuff.
100%. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. And hope to make it next week. Last week I
All
had power
right.
outage.
Yes, and next week I think we're doing 3 chapters again. So we will just prepare, but we did great. We got through all
Yeah,
the main
you did
stuff
great.
today.
And we don't have to go through every single exercise either,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I
Yeah.
know. I highlighted too much that I was like, oh, there's like
Yeah.
everything's highlighted.
Oh,
I can't
an hour, right?
read the whole book for you.
Yeah.
All
All
right, you
right.
guys. Thanks so
Okay.
much
Have a
for
beautiful day,
joining.
everyone. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.